what we're on about now. Two things. One is proposed changes to the licensing arrangements from the regulator, ACMA. Real proposals. Proposals not implemented, just put out there to get a reaction, get a response from us. There is a draft document of a proposed radio communications amateur stations class licence. So the ACMA's preferred position, as we understand it, of the three they put forward is a class licence because from the ACMA point of view it has a lot of advantages to them from the terms of workload and responsibility, and they pass it all off, and there is big potential for a negative impact on the amateur radio service as we know it. And we've been asked for our views. So with Dale's expertise, we've put together how we see it, and hopefully as a discussion point we can ask questions, form our own views, and let's see what happens. But if everyone of the majority of amateurs in Australia, not just WAA members, all amateurs, if they remain silent and do nothing, then you can be pretty certain that ACMA will simply go ahead and implement their preferred position. Because on the basis there hasn't been a massive uprising, riots in the street, anything like that, and by and large the proposals are accepted. Well, if we don't like that, it's up to us to do something about it. So I'll pass it over to Dale to open the PowerPoint up.
Thanks, Gil. I second your comments about the club activities. It's always a pleasure to hear of success. Okay, things for you to think about, for all of us to think about. So, as Gil indicated, the ACMA has put out their proposal and consultation document. It's on their website, along with other things. They state quite clearly in the document, which is quite long and complicated, but their preference is for a class licence. So what does that really mean for amateurs? And they want that because it reduces, they say it reduces expense and regulatory burden. So the first thing we think about, do we think there's too much regulation? Do we really think there's too much regulation in our existing arrangements? Second thing I would ask is the existing regulations aren't enforced. So what's going to change? And the thing I didn't put there, and I should have put there, that this all comes about because of government policy to deregulate and to simplify regulations. And this whole process is ACMA's response to that. So that's background. Now, we go through this document, and there's maybe some good bits, maybe, and there's definitely some very bad bits about the class licence and the proposals they're making. So, do the good bits outweigh the bad bits? Is there room for negotiation about the bad bits? So these are some of the things we need to think about. But overall, what is the best for the long-term outlook of amateur radio? However, we need a win-win situation. We need to engage positively in this process. We just can't say, bugger off, we don't like it. You could try that, but the problem won't go away, I suspect. So I think we need to be a bit clever about the way we engage this process and go about it the right way so that we get what we want and the ACMA perhaps gets something that they can live with. Now, first thing, the submissions close on April 2nd. It's not a lot of time, the issues are complicated. So we need to understand the issues, their implications on us as users of the radio frequency spectrum, particularly the amateur bands. And there's misleading information circulating. Certainly I've seen a letter that somebody circulated that would, if there was large numbers of those sent to the ACMA wouldn't do our cause at all good. So watch out what you read and act upon. The WIA is going to have a poll to get every amateur's view on the issue, and that will go to inform their approach to the ACMA and their response. Ideally, every licensed amateur will make a submission to the ACMA. I think that's unlikely, but the more submissions that are received, the better. And preferably, we'll all agree. If we all agree on the main points and on the way forward, that will be a very much better situation than if there's lots of variations and lots of disagreement, as has happened in the past. So we need to try and avoid that if we can. It might be good if the club committee agrees to make a submission on behalf of the Canberra Region Amateur Radio Club, just outlining a suitable response. But finally, we're dealing with public service. We have to speak their language, we have to be polite, we have to be well informed, and we have to keep it to the point, be in scope with the consultation. There's absolutely no point writing a response that is a long rant about everything is wrong with the ACMA. That will just end up in the bin and antagonise people. So that's sort of some of the background material. Getting into the guts of it, what I did, I went through the document, the proposal, and compared it more or less clause by clause with our existing licence determination. So our existing licence determination, we pay an annual fee. We renew it every year, although there is an option for 5 years, I believe. The ACMA states that's not taken up very often, so they don't think it's worthwhile. In a class licence, there's no annual fee and no renewal. It's there for life, which is one issue. What happens when you die, or want to give your call sign up, or whatever. But, so the question we should ask, is the licence renewal fee an issue for us? It's under $60. Is that a significant burden? And is the annual renewal process a serious burden? So is it really the regulatory burden that the ACMA or the amateurs makes out?
When you talk about regulatory burden, I really get the impression that ACMA is looking out for ACMA.
Oh, absolutely.
Not with the regulatory burden on it.
Well, when you read the thing, they're talking about regulatory burden on amateurs as well, and they want to simplify things.
Given that it's only $4 for the licence and $50 for the tax, which is applied by the federal government at budget time, no guarantee that the tax won't be re-implemented in another form.
Perhaps that's quite true. Yep.
Very well.
Yep. So the next thing that's possibly of concern to some of us, it indicates that we currently have the register of licences. So if you hear somebody over the air and think, hey, I haven't heard that cost on before, you can go actually check, first of all, if they're legitimate, where they are. It's useful. It's an important part of self-regulation in the amateur service. However, with the proposed class licence, there's likely to be no public information available, no register of call signs, no actual licence documents as such, so you won't have a licence. So, and that may be an issue if you want to operate overseas, if you want to be in a CPT country, where you have to have a copy of the licence to check the reciprocal licence arrangement. And some of this may become clearer in further iterations of the class licence, but that's part of the problem is the draft as it is. It's unclear in so many places that it's very hard to make an informed, truly informed decision.
Does it actually say in the ACMA document that the second box on the right, the no public information?
Well, it's kind of fair. I'd have to read it, but again, I think that's the implication of what they're talking about.
Because there must be a register somewhere.
Not with a class licence, you don't.
No, it's the CP licence, or marine licences now.
No, it goes completely, my understanding.
So the call signs, are they...
Well, that's well, come to that.
Call sign, what do you want?
Yep. So, as I mentioned before, we've got our amateur licence condition determination. Now, it's a legislative instrument with a well-defined process for change and scrutiny. It basically has to go to Parliament and blah, 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 blah. The class licence is still legislation, but it's a different sort, and I have not been able to find a clear distinction between what a determination is and what a licence is. My concern is that the class licence will be something that the ACMA can change easily without proper scrutiny. And we don't know, because it's unclear. I haven't been able to get an answer to that, but it's something we need to be aware of. And it may open up the door to all sorts of changes that can be made on a whim, basically. But again, I don't know because I haven't been able to get a good answer to that.
Dale, are there not, or hasn't there been a series of these class licences in existence for 15 years or so?
Yeah.
So, is there some collective wisdom about what has happened in those class licences?
Which they're a legislative instrument of Parliament, those class licences.
Yeah, but they're different to a determination. I'm going to have to get a clear definition of what one thing is versus the other. They're both legislation, quite correct. I don't know. I mean, CB radio's class licenses, as Greg points out, marine and various others too. I don't know what the impact's been. If anyone knows, that would be useful information.
One of the clear things that comes to me is that under the present power licence, we have a fair amount of liberty of what we can do in terms of building, design, and hardware.
It's coming up.
The class licence, as I understand the class licence from way back when they produced, they were basically licensing commercial product.
Yep.
Which you could not change.
Yep.
Well, we are of the view, or most of us are of the view, that the amateur radio service, unlike all these other class licensing, what the amateur radio service is, does not lend itself easily to class licensing. But, provided our concerns were met and in black and white, possibly many of our concerns could be met. But that is not clear. We haven't got there yet.
One could say, the present determination, if you translate that into a legislative document, which is called the amateur class licence, then there could be virtually no change.
Except it's a lesser instrument. The class licence we lose.
Sorry. I think what I'm saying, Bill, is we have to redefine the use of the word class in terms of the amateur service.
Yes. We would want our early view, and by saying we, as you can imagine, a lot of very experienced people who have experience in negotiation with the ACA and industry bodies, etc., have been all together talking to each other under the auspices of the WIA board, and the view is that the proposed class licence would need a lot of strengthening before it would meet the known concerns of amateurs in Australia. Not to say it couldn't be done, but at the moment we perceive it as being deficient.
So the next point, in our current licence condition, section 7 of the determination says, the amateur service must not cause interference to radio communication. Okay. In the proposed class licence, it actually has the same phrase, but in the proposal it indicates that class licences must not cause interference to radio communication services. I've got it there. Must not cause interference to other devices and services. That is a serious problem. Devices. Undefined, we don't know what it is, but if it means you're going to cause, you basically have to stop transmitting because you're interfering with somebody's hi-fi, even if it's their fault. Nothing to do with you. You've engineered your station correctly. But the problem is that device. What does it mean? What does it imply? It's unclear. We don't know. but it's unlikely to be good. So that's the issue. That's another issue.
And linked to that is that we must accept without any recourse interference from other services or users.
Yep.
So if you've got a problem with somebody, I know your power company's got a big arc of power on behind you, bad luck, you've got to accept it.
Yep.
So that to me is an absolute deal breaker.
Yep.
No way in hell will I accept that, to put it lightly.
Yep. No interference, no protection. That's what it's done. I should have put
Does
that in.
everyone make a spark gap transmitter?
Might be up to you.
So, and touching on the point that Dean covered, whilst it's not explicitly stated in our determination, we do, it's a fundamental part of amateur radio, make your own equipment. And provided it complies with the power limitation and spurious emission limits, all is good. In the proposed class licence, it's unclear, first of all, and in general, class licences are designed for common equipment, like CD radios or marine radios or something like that. So it's quite likely to be much more prescriptive. In any case, it's unclear. There isn't any guidance on whether or not we could continue to make our own equipment. Again, that's another deal breaker in my opinion. So, moving on, electromagnetic radiation. So our compliance with standards relating to our exposure to electromagnetic emissions. There's nothing in our current licence condition determination about it. The only reference to it is in our actual licence document, where it says whatever it says about complying with our pounds and limits. However, in the proposed class licence, there is quite a big chunk of text about complying with and referencing our PANSA standards. The implications are unclear at this point in time, but I'll bet it won't be easier, it won't be simpler or cheaper. We operate now under a much simplified arrangement in terms of EMR protection and exposure.
So it wouldn't make us any safer, the actual requirements to have a safe station that still exists. However, the burden of proving that, documenting that, assessing that, and potentially even certifying that would be on the individual. So a lot more admin, dare I say, a lot more regulatory burden on the amateurs.
Yes, exactly. Thanks for putting it that way, Matt. That's exactly right. And it could be much more expensive too.
Yes. So if you've got to pay somebody to do that.
So what other class licenses have? What is the EMR rules for CD, for instance?
I don't know. It's slow power. I don't know.
So it's there's a lot less complexities with existing class license equipment.
Because they're operating at low power and it's all commercial.
They set power and emission limits.
Yeah.
All the others. Yes.
It just, I mean, there's a whole lot of other things in the document, but there's some technical and operational ones too. For instance, in the 50 to 52 megahertz band, there's restrictions on what we can do to some extent, that we mustn't cause interference to primary services in the band. Now, the only primary services in the band are likely to be broadcasting, or we're broadcasting, and that comes in under a footnote in the radio regulations, which is really annoying, really not to get rid of it. But the restrictions in the proposed class licence apply to any apparatus or spectrum licence, potentially opening it up to a whole lot of other users, which could be problematic for us.
And we refer back to the earlier comments that we cannot cause interference to them and must accept interference from them. So that loses that down to us in effect.
And one thing that annoys me, the last point, power limits on the 137 and 475 kilohertz bands. All the users on that band, myself included, have assumed that power limit is in fact the IRP. It's 1 watt on 137 kilohertz and 5 watts on 475. The licence conditions determination is sufficiently unclear. Although a really, really careful reading, if you hold your mouth just right, you might and sort of interpret the typo in the text, you might find that actually the power limit applies, but that's not the way it's generally interpreted. And certainly wasn't the way it was meant when those bands were allocated. But in the proposal for the class license, it's now explicitly limiting power to 120 watts mean and 400 watts peak on those bands, which means that you won't get anywhere near the 1 watt EIRP or 5 watt EIRP just because of antenna efficiencies. So that is annoying and really not the intent of the original entries in the radio regulations about amateur operation in those bands. It's a minor point, but for me it's an annoying.
Because the technical person who wrote it up didn't understand the issues?
I don't think a technical person wrote up the... I think it's a bunch of lawyers.
Probably true.
Now, in the existing apparatus licence, there's some operational restrictions, like using the AX call sign on certain days, call operation, a number of other things. Proposal is they'd be removed to a largely non-binding operational guide, without any information on who would decide on the guide contents, who would write it. Would that be the ACMA or the third party? In general, the class licence will rely a lot more on third-party providers for administrative functions.
Obviously, Dale, we've seen the use of a third party for the providing excellent education services, as I mentioned before. Could obviously that would impose upon us another loser third party, potentially unlicensed managers, etc.
Experience with current third parties.
Yeah.
So, anyway, what the WIA has done, and I'm sure there's a lot of discussions outside the WIA, but the WIA has a spectrum strategy committee. I'm a member of that, as are people like Roger Harrison and various other people. We've, in the last week and a bit, met extensively and discussed this issue a lot, and decided, put forward to the WIA board, that on the information provided in the class license document itself and the proposal, that the only option that we could, that the ACMA or the amateurs should support is option A, that is maintain the status quo. There are three options: maintain the existing apparatus license conditions. B, and I haven't covered it for obvious reasons, it says simplify the existing arrangements without any details. So, okay,
I was expecting that's number 3 in disguise.
yeah. So, on the current evidence, I would support status quo, option A. However, there's a political dimension to this, whether we like it or not. But it's government policy to reduce regulation. The ACMA is trying to implement that, and they will do everything they can to do that. What we want to encourage them to do is to engage in a process of a collaborative and consensus-based development of an alternative that meets their needs and our needs, whether that's a class licence, which they have in other countries, to be fair, for amateurs, or a variation on our apparatus licence that meets their needs to reduce their administrative burden and simplify the overall regulatory. Now, that's a preliminary view. There may be changes. The ACMA may put out additional information. I don't know. So that's to be continued. But that, as it stands as of today, the view that we have of the proposed changes to the class licence. So what next? So the consultation documents are on the ACMA website. They're easy to get. They're hard to read, but you can get them. So I urge you all to get a copy of them, read them carefully, understand and think carefully about the issues. The WIA is planning to make available an information paper, which the Spectrum Strategy Committee completed on Monday night. and make that paper available, and some sort of poll process to get amateur feedback. Those URLs are available on the WIA website, and it'll be open to every amateur in the country, like a WIA member or not. Then,
when does that close?
it will close probably about 2 weeks. It's going to be tight because we've got to have the proposals, the consultation finishes in, what was it, the 2nd of April. And there's going to be some time to process all the data, so it's going to be tight.
Yes.
Why close it on Good Friday?
It's worth pointing out, Dale, that all amateurs, not everyone, not restricted to WIA members, you have to register to take part in the poll. You have to go to the website and register. That is to prevent, voter fraud, multiple responses, so that you'll have a once-only, single-use registration to participate in it.
As I understand, for non-members, I think it's for members, WIA members, you don't have to register.
We don't have to. That's right. But we are automatically registered. WIA members, non-members have to register.
Yeah. So anyway, the bottom line is make a submission to the ACMA. Think about it, make a submission. If you really think a class license is the way to go and all the benefits outweigh the disadvantages, then go for it. I'll be, in the absence of any other information, I'll be going for option A. But as I said, there may be changes between now and then. So make your submission, but do it closer to the date. Maybe a few days before if you can, because if things change, you'll have access to the latest thinking and advice.